let's hope the Trump administration follows Judicial Watch's lead and investigates this teachers union's contract that requires race discrimination in order to be implemented. So I've talked to you often about Judicial Watch's work exposing and combating woke racism by the left, this DEI obsession that is used to advance outrageous, unlawful discrimination based on race, sex, and other characteristics. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, the left-wing teachers union there in the city forced through a contract, through a strike, that required that if layoffs were to occur, that senior members would be protected, people who had seniority would be protected, which is outrageous separately, but that's a typical public union demand. But that protection would be limited if you were white. So essentially, if you are on the list for layoffs and you were black, they would skip over your name and go to the next white person. And when it came time for rehiring, similarly, blacks were hired first before any whites would be considered. That's literally in the contract. It's illegal, it's discriminatory under Minnesota and federal law. And Judicial Watch filed a taxpayer standing lawsuit on behalf of a taxpayer who objected to her tax monies being spent on behalf of to advance this woke racist contract. And the lower court said, no, taxpayer standing doesn't apply in this regard. The appellate court, we appealed the ruling. The appellate court said, of course it does. So the teachers union, and of course we're fighting the entire left-wing establishment there in Minnesota, appealed this to the Supreme Court of Minnesota. And we were there, that's about 3 or 4 months ago. I think there's a picture of me with Michael Bekesha, our attorney on the case. There we are, in front of the Minnesota State Capitol. The Supreme Court meets at the State Capitol in their own Supreme Court building. And that hearing, they met at the Supreme Court at the State Capitol. Beautiful building, by the way. In is it St. Paul? It must be St. Paul. Yes. Yeah, it was in St. Paul. And the Supreme Court essentially ruled 6-0 against us. Really terrible decision. And I don't want to give it too much credit by going through the detail, but I will describe what the ruling was. The school district challenges, so we're challenging, the government's defending their racism. The school district challenges the Court of Appeals' conclusions that Clapp is standing to bring her claims, and her claims are ripe. And the parties agree this case is now technically moot because the 2021-23 teacher contract is no longer in effect. But Clapp argues the exceptions to the mutinous doctrine apply here and should allow the case to continue. So the case is continuing. So that issue's been resolved. Standing is an essential element of jurisdiction, a legal requirement that a party have a sufficient stake in a justiciable controversy to seek relief from a court. To have standing, a party generally needs to have suffered some injury in fact or be the beneficiary of some legislative enactment granting standing. Here, Clapp relies on an exception to the general rule, the common law doctrine of taxpayer standing. Under that doctrine, taxpayers without a direct or personal injury may have standing to bring an action to restrain the unlawful use of public funds. Generally, in the context of taxpayer standing, the use of public funds is lawful if the funds are spent for a public purpose for which tax money may be used, and there is authority to make the expenditure, and the use is genuine as distinguished from a subterfuge or something farcical. We recently clarified that a taxpayer does not have standing, meaning we, the Supreme Court in a prior decision, when they seek only to generally restrain alleged illegal actions on the part of public officials. Rather, taxpayer standing exists only when the central dispute involves alleged unlawful disbursements of public funds. The requirement that the alleged unlawful disbursements be the central dispute means that a taxpayer may not manufacture standing by relying on expenditures that are merely incidental to the central dispute. Do you think the hiring and firing of teachers under a teacher's contract is incidental to the dispute? Do you? No, of course you don't. Not if you're being fair. Applying our law of taxpayer standing shows that Clapp had not sufficiently alleged that an unlawful disbursement of public funds is the central dispute in this case. That's the end. They figured out a way to eliminate taxpayer standing from challenging a racist teachers union contract in the biggest school district in the state, in Minneapolis. That's what the left-wing Supreme Court of Minnesota just did. Now, the court did note that they weren't ruling on the merits of the contract, which in fact they were, but they said that the contract can still be challenged by other individuals who may have standing. For instance, if a teacher gets fired because of their race under this contract, they can sue, and you can be sure that Judicial Watch would be happy, if possible, to represent them. And this is the statement that Judicial Watch made, or I made for Judicial Watch. The Minnesota Supreme Court's decision to reverse the Court of Appeals ruling is beyond the pale. Minneapolis's public schools is unabashedly discriminating against teachers based on their race. And the school district is using tax dollars to do so. The Minnesota Supreme Court's disgraceful decision not only threatens teachers' jobs, but also prevents Minnesota taxpayers present and future from holding their government to account. The woke, racially discriminatory contract cannot stand. Judicial Watch will ask the Trump administration to investigate this blatant civil rights violation and take all necessary steps to ensure teachers do not lose their jobs because of their race. So let's hope the Trump administration follows Judicial Watch's lead and investigates this teachers union's contract that requires race discrimination in order to be implemented. Right now, they're tracking teachers based on race, like they might do in South Africa, so they know who to fire based on race if layoffs have to take place. Outrageous. And certainly, we're not going to give up challenging it. We're going to think of other ways to challenge it more directly. Obviously, taxpayer standing has been walled off by the lefties in Minnesota. Taxpayer standing is kind of a liberal analysis of standing, right? Just think about it. It provides standing to many more people, and the left used to love it. But when Judicial Watch uses it, the left wants to destroy it and restrict it. It's like FOIA. The left loves FOIA only when they're using it. But the good news is, we still have this case over reparations in Evanston, Illinois, where they're providing reparations, $25,000 payments to people based on their race. Blacks only can apply, who are residents or have ancestors who are residents. And the other good news is that DEI is on the way out, at least kind of the most brazen form of it. I was talking about Facebook running away from censorship. Facebook just announced they're ending DEI. Other major corporations have ended DEI as well. McDonald's, Walmart, you name it. And of course, the Trump administration is committed to ending DEI, which encourages woke racism and discrimination, hostility to individuals based on race, and segregation. So DEI is on Judicial Watch's radar screen. We're challenging it directly. We've succeeded repeatedly in courts. We just lost in Minnesota, but we had 2 huge victories in California where they had race, gender, and other quotas that were knocked out thanks to Judicial Watch litigation, 2 separate lawsuits. Our reparations case in Illinois has put a freeze on all reparations projects across the land as they wait to see how this case turns out that Judicial Watch is pursuing. And of course, we've exposed the DEI and woke racism in schools throughout America and in our nation's military academies that train our rising leadership. And hopefully Pete Hegseth, who has promised to root out and stop this destruction of our military and this effort to alienate our military from the America that these fine men and women are wanting to protect, HECSEF is opposed to all of that as well. So we obviously will encourage the Trump administration when they're doing the right thing, but we're always going to keep on keeping on with our own litigation and investigations and such, because we know things are hard to change in Washington. And of course, there are other issues and challenges at the states that need focus and attention as well. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.